Hello, I'm Danny Cook, and welcome to the 8th episode of Halftime Cuppa's Halftime Podcast, a 15-minute show where we discuss just one footballing topic in as much detail as possible. So joining me on today's panel, we have Eleanor, Cardenas and S.A. Agboaye. How are you both?
Hello.
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. Glad to have you both on. On to today's format. As always, the panelists will be debating as to whether we will see a Premier League team have an artificial home pitch. Each panelist will have an opposing view to this debate. I'll now toss a coin to decide who will have which point of view. So, Elle, as this is your first show, take your pick, heads or tails?
Tails never fails, isn't that right? Expression?
Well, we'll soon find out. Ooh. Tails it is. You get to choose.
All right, I am going to choose against. I don't think there will be an artificial turf.
Excellent. And then obviously, SA, that leaves you with reasons as to why you think there will be one. Okay, so Elle, as you won the toss and you've chosen your category, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. While I think that technology will catch up, and I think that that turf will kind of be improved since the 80s, which for the listeners out there that want a history lesson, there was turf in the 80s in like League One sides and stuff, and goalkeepers would have to wear like long trousers, and like there was lots of injuries, and they got rid of it. Obviously now, I think with technology, they're improving the grass and trying to make it as realistic as possible, but I think a lot of players are against it. I know in 2014, Gareth Bale said when they had to play a Champions League game that he didn't like it. I know in the Women's World Cup, there was a bit of controversy because in Canada they have it and teams felt they had an advantage because they were playing on turf and not grass. So there's a lot of like personal problems, I think, with it. I think a lot of people, even if the technology is there, a lot of the players don't like it, a lot of the teams don't like it. I think it's that kind of like people don't want to change that quickly. Even with VAR, that's being trialled in the FA Cup. It's not actually made it to the Premier League yet. And I think the same thing will probably happen with turf, is that there'll be some trials of it. And I think 3G grass is allowed in the lower leagues, but I still think that kind of human hesitancy or the team hesitancy will delay that.
So you think it's a case of perception? And I mean, let's turn back the clock. England playing, I believe, Russia under the Steve McLaren era. They went away and I believe they lost a crucial game, which ultimately resulted in them not qualifying for the Euros. Do you feel that there's maybe a stigma and a perception that there is this sort of advantage by having an artificial pitch?
Yeah, 100%, because I think it standardizes the game. I think that, a lot of times grass is really important and people don't realize, well, maybe people realize it, but if you want to slow down a team, you don't cut the grass for a few days, or you can wet the pitch. I mean, having real grass, there's a lot of advantages that you wouldn't be able to get with turf because everything is standardized. And I think some teams, if Man City are playing you and you're not a top club, you can use your pitch to your advantage. And yeah, there is that kind of perception maybe, but also because of the advantages that grass can give you.
Okay, let's move on to SA now. SA, one of the things that stands out for me, if clubs were looking to use artificial pitches across English football, I know we're talking about Premier League here, but surely it's got to be the fact that you can keep games on.
I think having an artificial pitch limits the number of matches that have been called off due to adverse weather conditions. Like, for instance, if you have like a game called off due to like a waterlogged pitch, that would not happen.
And just on that, actually, as well, SA, Wembley Stadium, obviously over the years, maybe not so much this season, but over the years when there's been a lot of, I would say, sporting events there, such as the NFL, it does make a difference onto the pitch, the quality of the pitch when England play there. You obviously still see the markings, the NFL markings on the pitch as expected, but the turf itself looks in not great condition. Now, surely that's got to be a positive as well for, say, a Wembley. I know it's not attached to a Premier League club full time, but just Tottenham right now. But surely that's got to be a positive as well.
Yeah, of course. Also, I think the use of artificial grass has worked in rugby because Saracens at Alliance Park installed it back in 2013, and Newcastle Falcons installed it at their ground, Kingston Park, the following year. So if it works in rugby, then there's no reason as to why it shouldn't work in football.
Yeah, I guess, that's a valid point, and people can kind of maybe use, you can't really argue against rugby being a more physical sport than football, because obviously it is. But again, I go back to the fact that it's kind of that perception, and I think the tactical advantages you have with grass, and I think it standardizes the game. And I think in football, people don't want to see standardized game. They want, with VAR maybe coming in, with all these other changes being made, I think people are going to be protective. They want something that resembles, the game that they love, and maybe the pitch is the last what's left. Who knows?
Artificial pitches, they're flat surfaces, right? Which you would think encourage a passing style of play, which could help England's national team probably play this more passing game. Do you see that at all? Do you think that could be a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think even the tiniest of changes affect how you play the game, So, yeah, of course, it could be definitely a possibility. I'm not saying clubs won't adapt, but it's whether or not they want to, and how long, you're going to be stubborn and hold out.
SA, big question mark for me, money. Obviously, you've got clubs like Bournemouth coming up through the system and making their way to the Premier League. Now, say if they had a ruling which allowed artificial pitches in League Ones, League Twos, Championships, etc., they worked their way up to the Premier League. Now, what would you do if you was the Premier League's sort of chief executive right now? If you were Richard Scudamore, if you was him right now, what would you do?
Well, if a team coming up to the Premier League had an artificial pitch, I'd say that it has to be like 50% natural grass and 50% synthetic grass, so that both teams playing on the pitch have a level advantage. Also, when it rains, the pitch won't get destroyed as much.
Injuries are obviously a part of the game, and they can come in various forms. Obviously, on grass pitches, you could slip, you could twist your ankle or whatever. But obviously, on an artificial pitch where it's going to be flat and you maybe don't have that pothole, do you think that there may be more or less injuries because of it?
It depends really, because I've actually played in artificial grass myself, and I can tell from experience that it's not a very nice material to fall on. So you can end up with like burns and stuff. It's just not nice.
Is there any way around that at all?
Yeah, like I said, you use both natural and synthetic, but it's not going to be cheap though.
We'll come on to costing actually now with L. Money wise, then I've sort of spoke about how a club like Bournemouth or any other club could rise up and then suddenly hit the Premier League and be sort of at a crossroads.
I would say you would have to change it to grass. You'd have, if you're in a league where 99% of the clubs use grass, you've gotten promoted. Well, then use grass, and that's more expensive, but you're also going to have the money from being in the Premier League to afford that change.
SA, back to you. Do you think it'd be good that you have all this training? I mean, because you could run training, couldn't you? You could run multiple events on. If you had a pitch that was artificial, you could do so much with it, couldn't you?
Yeah, of course. In fact, I think at some stadiums, they have both artificial side and a natural side of grass. Is it called like retractable or something like that?
Like the Tottenham one, yeah? Because yes. I know they're not talking about AstroTurf, but they're talking about the NFL, aren't they? When they have the pitches.
What could happen is that a team could have like a retractable pitch where it's synthetic on one side and natural on the other.
Any other points you want to raise at all?
I think it's more a more of a humanistic reason more than like the technology. I mean, I think the technology, of course, will be there, and they'll have it where you won't know if it's real or not. I definitely believe that will happen. But I do think change is hard for a lot of people, especially in the Premier League. I mean, VAR technology has been around for years, but we're just now seeing it, and at this stage it's being trialled. And they did have, AstroTurf in the 1980s. Like I said, they trialled it in the 1980s, and then players complained. And then in 1994, the Premier League replaced all the pitches made from artificial turf back to grass. And I think maybe it's that stigma of like, oh, we tried this, it didn't work. So to get people to try it again, that's the hard part, knowing that they have tried it in the past.
And any final points from you, SA, at all?
I've just had a thought about artificial pitches in rugby. It must sting a bit diving on that sort of surface.
It's strange. I've gone to Ealing Trail Finders. Like, it's all AstroTurf. It's incredible that they're diving around and trying to tackle people and all that on Astro. I'm guessing you wouldn't be up for that then, SA, playing rugby on Astro.
Yeah, that you must sting a bit, like trying to dive on artificial pitches.
I feel sorry for the goalkeeper if there is to be any in the Premier League. Anyway, I believe that is all we have time for. Thank you very much to you both for some really good reasons for and against. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Don't forget that you can decide who you think your winner is by casting your vote below, and whether you think we will ever see a return for the artificial pitch into the Premier League. Leave your thoughts below, of course. Be sure to check out the various pieces of content we have across our site, as well as our football at halftimecuppa.com. A final shout out to today's panelists, Eleanor, Cardenas, and SA Agboaye. I've been your host, Danny Cook, and you've been listening to the 8th episode of the Halftime Podcast.
Ta-ra!